Hey friends, welcome to So Supportive. I'm Tracy. Thank you so much for joining this week. I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be telling a little bit of a story about something that happened to me last week while I work on one of my UFOs. So this is my scrappy trip around the world, and I have had this one in the works since probably 2020, so 5 years. And if you were on the live last week, you may have seen that my sewing machine foot pedal, stopped working. And so I needed to work on something that I could use the start stop button. So I'm pretty sure my machine's going to have to go in for a little bit of a spa day. So, not quite sure how that's all going to work or how long that is going to take, but that's just a little bit of a news update. So, meanwhile, if you are a person who doesn't like chatty videos, feel free to skip this one. This one isn't a tutorial, it's story time. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine the other day, and we were discussing a video we had both watched on YouTube where the creator was showing all of the techniques she uses to make her quilt box absolutely perfect. She clearly found so much joy in taking her time and making everything as perfect as possible. My friend said, "That's not what makes me happy, but I enjoy watching her and seeing her joy." So I said, "Me too." And then I paused and I said, "Actually, I'm a little bit of a perfectionist." She said, "Yeah, you are. But does it bring you joy?" This question caused me to pause and reflect. Yes, I like it when things line up just so, but I put a lot of pressure on myself. Part of it is because I worked in publishing, where not only did I need to show good work, but I also was surrounded by incredibly talented professional quilters. But if I dig a little bit deeper, I can remember one moment that causes me a lot of pain. A person who I thought was a friend said unkind things about my quilting skills. Was this part of why I now feel the way I do, or had I always felt that way? I thought back to the first time I had ever appliqued anything. I was working my way through Applique 12 Easy Ways by Ellie Sienkiewicz, and I had hand-stitched a tiny red heart onto some blue calico. I was so proud of this little block, I showed it to all of my friends. I found that little block a while back, and I hate to say it, but I felt a little bit embarrassed that I showed it to all of my friends. The stitching was uneven and obvious. It was a little bit puckered. It was so far from perfect. So, what exactly happened in the years between having so much happiness and pride in my work and feeling the incredible weight of perfection? It weighed on my mind for several days. I was retelling the conversation with my friend to my youngest as we drove home from the store, and she immediately cut me off and said, "No, it doesn't. It doesn't bring you joy at all." I argued that I do enjoy a good perfectly matched seam. I love it when my points line up perfectly. My youngest said, "Yeah, but the rest of the time it makes you miserable. I hear you complaining all the time when it doesn't look good enough." Tears welled up in my eyes. What happened to me, I thought. I pushed down the tears so that I could get home safely, but my mind was reeling. I was shook to my core. Later, I allowed myself to think back to a pivotal time for me. I was new to the industry, and a newish friend of mine needed help hitting a deadline. I immediately raised my hand and volunteered. Isn't that what we quilters do? We help our friends out. I felt excited as I drove the long distance to her house to pick up the block she needed me to make. When I arrived, my excitement turned to trepidation. I immediately regretted my decision to help. As she gave me a tour of her studio, I could see how precise her work was, and I wondered if I could be as precise with mine. Then she showed me the block that she needed done. It was made up of all manner of geometric shapes and angles, and it was way more advanced than I had ever sewn before. I should have said no. I should have said, I don't think I can do it. But I didn't. I took the precisely cut fabric and headed to my car and drove home. I didn't know how I was going to make this block, but I gave myself a pep talk and I dove in. And of course, my machine was at the shop getting a tune-up, but I had a longer machine to sew it together. It was brand new, so I shouldn't have any trouble, I told myself. But that's not what happened next. The triangles kept getting sucked down into the machine. My seam allowance was not consistent. I was doing my best, but the triangles were sliding as I sewed. I finished the block after several ripping out and re-sewing attempts. The block was not perfect. I had spent so much time on it already, but I needed to get the block back to her. I had run out of time. I finished up the best I could, and I drove my block back to my friend's house and dropped it off. I figured that I couldn't be the only one who wasn't as precise as my friend. I mean, that's part of a group project, right? Everyone's quarters and inch is slightly different, right? A few days later, I got a message from my friend. She told me that she had turned her project in on time, but she made a point to let me know that she had to take apart my block and re-sew it. She was surprised that my sewing skills weren't better. I was a professional quilter, after all. She made me feel bad on so many levels. I found myself wondering, what just happened? I reread the message over and over. It stung. I was embarrassed. I didn't want anyone else to think that about my quilting. So I changed. I started to notice every time my cutting was off. I started to realize that my quarter of an inch was inconsistent. I started to unpick every seam where my points were even a little bit off. This was especially true when I was sewing for work. For the next 14 years, I was hyper vigilant about how I made everything. Then life happened. I lost my sister and was consumed by grief. I moved to take a job, causing my older kids to move too. More grief. New coworkers, all talented quilters, and of course, they too would judge the new girl's work. Silently, of course. At least, that is what I imagined. But now I wasn't going to show anything less than perfect in professional circles. Because I spent all day working on quilt patterns and magazine articles, I spent less and less time outside of work quilting. My husband threatened to take my quilting cart away. My sewing machine sat idle most of the time. When I did quilt, it was on tight deadlines and it didn't feel joyful like it did in the beginning of my quilting journey. When I didn't have a deadline, I didn't know what to sew. Too many options, too many unfinished projects, and too many quilt tops left over from work. No desire to make something from my heart. Slowly, after a while again, I started to quilt again. There were babies born that needed quilts. My first attempt was maybe the worst quilt I have ever made, but you know what? They loved it. I actually just got a note saying that my quilt was a part of that special little girl's evening ritual, and she didn't sleep without it. That is funny. Not perfect, but still good enough. Still loved by a sweet little girl. Fast forward to last fall. I had wanted to create a YouTube channel for so long, but I was paralyzed by the fear of it not being exactly how I imagined it. And of course, I imagined it highly polished and perfect. But I started this channel anyway, even though I knew what I didn't know about producing a YouTube channel. I started filming in my studio, boxes and all. I pointed out mistakes, and you called me out on it in the comments. Those blocks look perfect, Tracy. It seems to me you have 2 pillowcases, Tracy. You don't need to make ones that match. Stop being so hard on yourself, Tracy. You're doing great. My studio isn't perfect. My quilting isn't perfect. My editing isn't perfect, but I keep pushing on because it brings me joy. That person is no longer in my life, but the scar is still there. I hadn't thought about that moment in so long, but clearly it affected me deeply. I went from feeling confident and happy when I could make something with my 2 hands to feeling less than, comparing my work to everyone else's work. But here's the thing, we're all different. Our goals as quilters are different. I've never wanted to have my quilt hang in Houston or Paducah. That was never a goal of mine. My quilts keep my loved ones warm. My quilts get dragged around by children. My quilts have pets snuggle on them. My quilts hang out to decorate my home. And you know what? That's all good enough for me. I'm ready to let this wound go. I would never tell someone that they didn't do a good job when they were clearly trying to help me. Heck, I try very hard not to ever criticize another quilter online. I try to scroll on by or find something positive to say, because I know how easy it is to hurt someone's feelings, to steal their joy. So now here we are. This channel is my corner of the Quiltiverse. Here, we cheer each other on. We say nice things. We sew through pain, health challenges, and piles of UFOs. Sewing in pajamas is allowed. Swearing happens, especially when the seam ripper comes out. Sometimes points match, and sometimes they don't. But the most important thing is that we keep going, because every stitch gets us closer to a finished quilt. And that is what matters. Well, I know that was a little bit different than my normal content, but I kind of thought it was important to share. I feel like this is a place where I can share with you who I really am, and maybe some of my experiences will help you. And as I was recording this, I wondered if any of you have had experiences like that. Have you had experiences where someone said something unkind or pointed something out that made you feel less than? Well, I hope if you did, that you will take this opportunity with me to let it go. I'm giving myself permission to let it go. I'm never going to be that perfect, and it honestly doesn't bring me joy. It makes me unhappy. It makes me feel like I need to be something that I'm not. And I think with everything that's happening right now in the world, if we can find a little bit of joy right here in our sewing rooms, then we should find a little bit of joy in our sewing rooms. You know what I mean? I know that they're the quilt police. I know that this wasn't an event that they probably even remotely still think about. So why am I carrying it around? I am going to let it go. I appreciate it every time you guys call me out and say, it looks good, Tracy. You've said it before, and I hear you every time you do it. So this is me putting it out there again, that I'm not perfect. You've all seen my channel. Or maybe if you're new, you haven't, but you will if you decide that you want to delve in a little deeper to the content on my channel. There are videos where there were boxes behind me. Not a pretty quilt. Or maybe there was like a pile of quilts on top of some boxes. So, believe me, I know I'm not perfect. But that's not what this channel has ever been about. This channel has been about finding ways forward over the struggles that I've got. Because I know that when I'm putting myself out there, I find people who are just like me, who also are struggling and are finding ways past different obstacles in life. So, if you enjoyed this video, I would love it if you dropped a like, decided to subscribe, leave me a comment, and tell me what you think. And if you don't have anything to say, you can just leave me an emoji if you like. Leave me a star. That would be lovely. And thank you all. Thank you for listening and for just being there. I really appreciate it. While you're here, YouTube thinks that you're going to like this video up here. Give it a shot and see if you like it. I hope to see you again next week. And if you're around on Thursday and you want to join our live, I go live on Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. And you can chat with me also anytime on my Patreon. The link is below. So thank you so much. I will see you next week.